Have you ever wondered what happens when the people who are meant to protect us use their power to harm instead? Imagine a moment where authority becomes abuse, where a simple encounter turns into something no family should ever endure. That is exactly what happened in today's story, a tale that will leave you questioning the line between justice and cruelty. Welcome back to Talecraft, the place where powerful stories come alive. If this is your very first visit to our channel, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with friends, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that will keep you at the edge of your seat. We believe stories have the power to inspire, challenge, and make us reflect on the world around us, and today's story does exactly that. At the center of this shocking account is a young black girl. She was like any other child, full of energy, hope, and the innocence that comes with youth. But one day her life took a sudden, painful turn when she crossed paths with a police officer who allowed racism and arrogance to dictate his actions. What should have been a routine moment spiraled into something much darker, leaving the girl with not just physical pain but an experience that would never leave her. Now, this story isn't just about an officer's abuse of power. It's about what happened next. Because when the young girl's father heard what had been done to his daughter, he didn't just react as a parent. He stepped into that moment as a man with a reputation the entire world respected. A man who had spent his life in the ring, mastering discipline, strength, and strategy. A world champion fighter. And when he arrived on the scene, the tables turned in a way the racist cop never saw coming. This tale matters because it highlights a truth that too often gets ignored. Unchecked authority has consequences, and justice doesn't always come from where we expect it. Sometimes, it comes from those who refuse to be silent in the face of cruelty. Sometimes it comes from a father's love and an unwavering demand for respect. So today we're diving into a story of power, pain, and redemption. Stay with me until the end because what you're about to hear will remind you that strength isn't only about fists. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in restraint, in love, and in demanding justice where others see none. It started on an ordinary afternoon. The sun was out, the streets were buzzing, and children filled the air with laughter. Among them was Maya, a 12-year-old girl with a bright smile and dreams bigger than the small town she lived in. She carried a backpack filled with books, heading home from school, completely unaware that her day was about to turn into a nightmare she would never forget. As she crossed the street near a corner store, a patrol car screeched to a halt beside her. The officer inside, a man in his 40s with a hardened face and an unmistakable sneer, stepped out aggressively. "Hey you," he barked, pointing at her as though she had done something criminal. Maya froze, clutching the straps of her backpack, confused. She had done nothing wrong, but the officer's tone suggested otherwise. Without even explaining himself, the cop accused Maya of loitering and acting suspicious. His words were sharp, dripping with a bias that made bystanders glance uncomfortably. A few people stopped to watch, whispering among themselves, but no one dared intervene. Maya tried to speak, her small voice trembling as she insisted she was just walking home. But the officer didn't want to hear her. His face twisted with anger at her attempt to defend herself. "Don't talk back to me," he growled. He reached out suddenly, gripping Maya's arm with unnecessary force. The girl yelped in pain, struggling to pull away. Instead of loosening his grip, the officer tightened it. His frustration boiled over into an act of cruelty that shocked the crowd. With one swift, violent motion, he twisted her arm until a sickening crack echoed in the air. Maya collapsed to the ground, screaming. The crowd gasped. Some pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding horror. A young woman shouted, "That's a child. You're hurting her." But the officer glared at the onlookers, his authority silencing them. He stood over Maya, breathing heavily, almost proud of what he had done. She clutched her broken arm, tears streaming down her cheeks, her cries piercing the summer air. It was a scene that should never have happened. Maya begged him to stop, her voice trembling, but the officer continued berating her. "This is what happens when you don't respect the law," he snarled. His words revealed the ugly truth. This wasn't about enforcing rules or keeping order. This was about control, fueled by prejudice and the misuse of power. He saw a defenseless black child and believed he could get away with treating her however he pleased. But the silence of the crowd wouldn't last forever. Among the witnesses was a neighbor who recognized Maya. Her name was Mrs. Daniels, an elderly woman who had seen Maya grow up since she was a toddler. Mrs. Daniels rushed forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Officer, that's enough. She's a little girl." The officer turned on her, his expression cold and dismissive, but the intervention gave Maya a glimmer of hope. By now, others had joined Mrs. Daniels in protest. Several people shouted at the cop, demanding he let Maya go and calling for an ambulance. The tension was thick, the crowd caught between fear of the uniform and outrage at the injustice. The officer, however, seemed unmoved. He dragged Maya toward his patrol car, ignoring her cries and the pain etched across her face. His actions had crossed a line, and the entire community knew it. As Maya sat trembling on the ground beside the car, clutching her injured arm, one thought kept racing through her mind: her father. She wanted her dad. She needed him. He had always been her protector, the one who taught her to be strong, the one who promised never to let anyone hurt her. And though he wasn't there yet, fate was already moving in her favor. News of the incident was spreading fast, and it would soon reach the man who would change everything. The officer believed he had asserted his dominance, that his actions would go unchallenged. But he had no idea who Maya's father was. He had no idea that the man he had just wronged was not only a parent filled with unshakable love for his child but also a fighter recognized across the world. The officer thought he had silenced the child, but in reality he had just awakened a storm he could not contain. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Within minutes, a neighbor had phoned Maya's father, his voice trembling as he explained what happened. At first her father couldn't believe it. His little girl, hurt by the very people sworn to protect. The words felt like a nightmare. But when he heard, "Her arm is broken," the disbelief turned into a rage so fierce that it seemed to ignite the air around him. Maya's father wasn't just any man. He was Darius Cole, a world champion fighter respected for his discipline, feared for his power, and admired for his honor. In the ring he was known for his unbreakable spirit, the kind that never backed down. Outside the ring he was known as a gentle father, the type who braided his daughter's hair before school and read her stories at night. To harm Maya was to strike at his very soul. When Darius arrived on the scene, the crowd instinctively parted. His towering frame and sharp presence carried weight. But it wasn't just his size or reputation that made people step aside, it was the fire in his eyes, the unmistakable look of a man who had just been told his daughter was in danger. His footsteps were steady, but each one was heavy with purpose, like the build-up to a storm about to break. He saw her immediately. Maya sat on the ground near the patrol car, her face pale with pain, tears streaking down her cheeks. Her small hand clutched her arm, which was swollen and bent at an unnatural angle. Darius's chest tightened. The sight of his little girl hurt was like a dagger to his heart. He rushed to her side, kneeling down, his strong hands suddenly gentle as he whispered, "Daddy's here. I've got you, baby." Maya's eyes lit up through her tears, and for a moment she found comfort in his presence. But the reality of her pain quickly returned, and she winced. "He hurt me, Daddy," she sobbed, pointing weakly at the officer. Darius's jaw tightened, his muscles flexing as he fought to remain calm. He kissed her forehead softly, then rose to his feet with a terrifying calmness that only true fighters possess before striking. The officer, who had been so bold just minutes before, shifted uncomfortably. He recognized Darius now. This wasn't just a father. This was the Darius Cole, the man who had fought in arenas across the globe, defeating champions with precision and strength. For the first time that day the officer's confidence wavered. The uniform he wore no longer felt like protection. Instead, it felt like a thin shield against a storm he had no control over. Darius locked eyes with him, his voice deep and steady. "You broke my daughter's arm." It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with such clarity that it sent shivers through the onlookers. The officer tried to justify himself, stammering about suspicion and procedure, but his words rang hollow. The crowd, now emboldened by Darius's presence, began shouting over him, demanding justice and accountability. The tension was thick, but Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence, his posture, and the sheer weight of his reputation spoke louder than any shout. Every fighter knows the power of restraint, and Darius embodied it. Yet behind his calm exterior was a hurricane of anger waiting for the right moment to strike. His only focus was on Maya's safety and making sure this injustice didn't go unanswered. Emergency responders arrived, pushing through the crowd to tend to Maya. As paramedics carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, Darius held her hand, promising he would be right behind her. His voice softened for her ears alone. "I'll make this right." She nodded weakly, trusting him completely. That bond between father and daughter, unshakable, unbreakable, fueled the determination now burning inside him like fire. As the ambulance doors closed and Maya was driven away, Darius turned back to the officer. The crowd fell silent, knowing something powerful was about to unfold. The fighter in him had been awakened, not for sport, not for glory, but for justice. The officer had no idea what kind of force he had unleashed. Darius wasn't here just as a champion. He was here as a father, and that made him unstoppable. The crowd grew restless as Darius faced the officer, the air crackling with tension. Whispers rippled through the gathering like electricity, everyone sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Darius's fists clenched at his sides, not in a wild rage, but with the controlled discipline of a man who had fought battles his entire life. His eyes locked onto the cops, and for the first time the officer's swagger faltered. "You think you can put your hands on children and walk away?" Darius's voice thundered, but it was steady, sharp, and controlled. The officer took a step back, instinctively reaching for his taser, but the crowd erupted in angry shouts. Cameras went up, cell phones recording every second. Darius raised his hand calmly, signaling the crowd to stay back. He wanted the world to see the truth, not chaos but justice. The officer tried to regain control. "She resisted arrest," he barked, his voice trembling despite his attempt at authority. But Darius stepped closer, towering over him, his presence a storm bearing down. "She's a child," Darius growled, each word cutting like a blade. "My child. And you broke her arm because of your ego." The officer swallowed hard, the words echoing in his mind, stripping away the thin veneer of power his badge once carried. Someone from the crowd shouted, "He's lying. We saw it all." Others joined in, their voices creating a chorus of truth. The officer's eyes darted nervously, realizing the support he thought he had was gone. Darius didn't need to touch him. The people had already turned against him. Still, the fighter in Darius remained ready, his body coiled with precision, prepared to protect himself if the situation escalated further. The cop pulled out his taser, desperation etched across his face. But before he could raise it, Darius stepped in closer, so close that the officer had no room to move. His voice dropped to a low growl only the officer could hear. "Try it. See what happens when you point that at a man who spent his life facing real opponents, not unarmed children." The taser shook in the officer's hand, his confidence crumbling. Gasps filled the air. Cameras zoomed in. The crowd was no longer just bystanders. They were witnesses, guardians of truth. They wanted to see justice served, and Darius was giving them the moment they would never forget. The officer's hand dropped slowly, the taser lowering until it hung limply by his side. The act of surrender was small, but it was enough for everyone watching to see the truth of his weakness. Darius didn't stop there. He leaned in, his voice sharp but controlled. "Every scar on my body tells a story of a fight I earned. But what story will you tell about breaking a child's arm? About abusing your badge for power? You wear that uniform like it makes you strong, but all it does is expose your weakness." The officer's face flushed red, caught between shame and fear. At that moment, more police vehicles pulled up, sirens flashing. The crowd's chants grew louder. "Justice for Maya. Justice for Maya." The arriving officers surveyed the scene, quickly recognizing Darius and the chaos surrounding their colleague. Some looked at the trembling cop with thinly veiled disgust. It was clear that even among his own, support was evaporating fast. The walls around him were closing in. Darius raised his hands slightly, showing he wasn't here for violence. His voice carried above the noise, "I don't need to fight him. The world has already seen the truth. My daughter deserves justice and she will get it." The crowd cheered in agreement, their voices shaking the very ground. Darius wasn't just speaking as a father anymore, he was speaking as a symbol, giving voice to everyone who had been silenced before. The officer, once brimming with arrogance, now stood small, exposed, and utterly defeated. His authority had melted under the weight of truth and the presence of a father who refused to back down. Darius turned his back on him, not out of weakness, but as the ultimate show of dominance. He walked away, his head high, knowing he had already won the most important battle, defending his daughter's honor and dignity in front of the world. The chaos of the confrontation slowly gave way to a heavy silence. The officer stood frozen, his head bowed, while the other cops quietly moved in to take control of the situation. But it wasn't Darius they approached, it was their fellow officer. In a shocking reversal, they took his taser, removed his badge, and placed him under investigation right there in front of the crowd. Justice, though delayed, had finally begun to stir. Maya, her arm wrapped carefully in a sling, stood beside her father. The crowd gathered around her, offering words of comfort and strength. Some called her brave, others simply said they were sorry for what she had endured. Her father placed a hand gently on her shoulder, reminding her with his presence that she was never alone. She wasn't just a victim, she was the spark that had lit a fire in her community. News cameras swarmed the scene, reporters broadcasting live as the story spread far beyond the courthouse. Clips of the officer's cruelty and Darius's powerful confrontation flooded the internet. Millions of people across the nation watched, outraged by what they saw. But just as many were inspired by Maya's strength, by Darius's courage, and by the undeniable truth that justice could no longer be ignored. The world was paying attention. In the days that followed, protests filled the streets. Signs with Maya's name rose high above the crowds. Her story became a rallying cry for change, a reminder that no act of injustice, no matter how small or hidden, could remain in the dark forever. Politicians were pressured, police departments questioned, and reforms demanded. What began as one officer's act of cruelty had ignited a much larger movement for accountability. For Darius, the fight was both personal and symbolic. He spent his days by Maya's side as she healed, but he also spoke out to anyone who would listen. He reminded people that he wasn't just a world champion fighter, he was a father. And like any parent, his most important fight wasn't in the ring, but for the safety, dignity, and future of his child. His words carried a weight that no title belt ever could. The disgraced officer faced consequences unlike anything he had expected. Stripped of his position, publicly shamed, and charged for his actions, his downfall was swift and unforgiving. But while his name quickly faded into a cautionary tale, the names of Maya and Darius grew brighter. They weren't just survivors of injustice. They became symbols of resilience, of what happens when truth refuses to be silenced. Maya's recovery was long, but her spirit never wavered. She returned to school with her head high, surrounded by classmates who now saw her as more than just a quiet girl. She was a fighter in her own right. Every time she lifted her arm, even in pain, it was a reminder of what she had endured and overcome. And every smile she gave was a victory against the hate that tried to break her. The community, once divided, found new strength in unity. Neighbors who had been silent before now stood together, unwilling to look away from injustice ever again. Darius often reminded them, "This isn't just about my daughter. This is about all of our children. None of them should fear the one sworn to protect." His words echoed through rallies and community meetings, a call for collective courage. And now, to you watching this story unfold, ask yourself, what would you have done if you were there? Would you have stood silent, or would you have raised your voice? Stories like Maya's matter because they reveal the truth, that injustice survives only when good people do nothing. But together, with courage and unity, we can create a world where no child has to fear the abuse of power again. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey. This is Talecraft, where stories are told not just to entertain, but to inspire. If this story moved you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think, share your voice, and keep this conversation alive. Because change begins with stories, but it lives through the people who carry them forward.